Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Audeze MM-100, a full-size, around-the-ear, open-back, planar magnetic headphone that comes in at $400 US. What's the MM in there? Well, this is the lower-priced model of Audeze's Manny Marroquin line. Manny Marroquin being a well-known and well-decorated mixing engineer for a lot of today's popular music. He collaborated with Audeze to develop this unit and its big brother, the MM-500, to use to help him do his mixing and mastering work on that. So, how did that turn out? What does it sound like? We're going to find out in this video today. A quick disclaimer here. I bought this unit secondhand from a friend of the channel for a reasonably good deal. Audeze does not know that I have this unit or that I am doing this review, so they have made no attempt to influence my opinion on this in any way. So, what makes the MM-100 tick? Do I recommend it for listening to music and enjoying music at the in-home setting, or is it really more of a professional piece? Find out my thoughts on all of that right after shameless self-promotion.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style, and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
My general takeaway on the MM-100 is that it's okay. There are a couple of issues with it that I think keep it from being like an at-home primary use for music enjoyment headphone for me. I can see why the tuning might work for some professional applications though, so there is that. However, I still think that even with that in there, it might be just a little bit overpriced at $400 US. So even though this is one of the cheaper Audeze planar magnetics out there, what you get for the money that you spend on this, I think like it's just nothing special in that regard. And what you're paying for a little bit there might just be the tuning in a couple of specific areas to try to reveal a couple of potential specific faults in whatever mix or master that you're working on for pro audio settings and all of that. So, let's dive into this review and find out why I say all of these things, starting with the specs. Again, $400 US brand new price, 18 ohms rated impedance with a 98 decibel per milliwatt rated sensitivity. It is fairly easy to drive. I didn't have any trouble pushing this with some lower powered amps. So if you are doing your mixes and your mastering on the road, you're probably okay with most dongle DAPs, or dongle DACs I should say, out there, or DAPs or that sort of thing. Like power is generally not an issue. It has a fairly high mass of 475 grams, so it feels a little bit heavy in the hand and all of that. And you can see that the headband system here is a break from Audeze's like LCD line, and even from the MM-500. But even with the different design and all of that, I find the balance between the clamp force and the weight and how the weight is distributed to be just fine. I don't have any real comfort issues with this and haven't had any comfort issues with it over the period of time that I've had it in for review here. And again, the clamp is well done, at least for my head here, because it stays in place reasonably well if I move my head around, but it's not the vice grip kind of clamp that I remember. I think it was the MM-500 clamped really hard, and a couple of other Audezes have clamped really hard. This one is not like that. All right. Some other build aspects to talk about, one in particular, and it's related to the headband, I think. Like, why is this headband a little bit different than Audeze's past? One could be the price, but two, I think, has more to do with this. Look at the input connectors on the cups. There are 3.5 millimeter jacks on each cup. Now, looks can be deceiving here because this is not a dual input headphone where each cup here gets its own direct power from the amp. No, both of those are 4-pole TRRS jacks in there. You can plug a 3.5 millimeter connector into either side and it will power the other side. So one of the reasons the headband is different is because you can plug a single cable into either the left or the right cup here. Doesn't matter. And so there is some wiring going through the headband to be able to get to the signal to the other side. And in fact, you can see how on the yoke right here, I don't know how well this will show up, you can see some of the cabling come through, okay, right in there. And of course there is the matching on the other side. We've got some cabling right there. So you can see it, it's well hidden in there, but it is definitely present. Okay. What does that mean? That means we should talk about cabling for just a moment, because you're not going to get just a standard dual 3.5 millimeter headphone cable that works with Hi-Fi Mens or Focals or a number of other headphones out there anymore. Okay, it's a special cable that comes with it. The stock cable is terminated in a 1/4 inch or 6.35 millimeter TRS single-ended connector. There is an adapter here to go from this size down to 3.5 millimeter in the box. The cabling itself, is very thin. All right, and all of that. I hope that shows up okay. There is not much to it. It's a fairly high gauge cabling in there with rubber insulation over, or vinyl insulation over, and all that. And then on the headphone end, the stock cable is a single-ended 3.5 millimeter TRS. Okay, so if you want to run the headphone with a single-ended connection, this is what you're going to need. Okay, however, the jacks in the cups are TRRS, so you can connect them balanced with an aftermarket cable. One example being the Hart HC2. If you know Hart's modular system right here, okay, the HC2 has a 3.5 millimeter TRRS on the headphone end, and you can plug this into either side of the MM-100 and it'll work fine. And then if you get their modular system here, you have this mini XLR on the amp end, which connects to what they call interconnects, which can go to an XLR connector or a Pentacon or a, even single-ended 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch connectors, that sort of thing. I ended up using the Hart a fair amount because I just didn't really like the stock cable very much. It was just too long, too flimsy for me, and kind of got caught on things and all of that. So again, a single cable connection, pick a side. Don't get a standard dual 3.5 millimeter cable because it will not work right with this. Okay, you still overall see the Audeze aesthetic though. Just the shape of the ear cups, you've got this vaguely A-shaped thing going on in the grill work here. And then also you have you've got I'm pretty sure these are glued on pads, right? I mean, so that's fairly standard in there too. The pads are nice and thick and soft and cushy though. The ear opening may be a little bit small on the small side for some people, so that's something to keep in mind, though it did not bother me. But it is a ruggedly built headphone. It's not much to look at, just has a simple, kind of industrial looking black and gray design to it. Okay, but I mean, it is well made, it is sturdy. You can toss it in this bag, this velvet carrying bag that comes with it, and just throw this in your backpack or your suitcase. And for the most part, what the bag is going to do is just prevent this from getting scratched up, prevent things from poking into the driver here, and that sort of thing. But the headphone itself is fairly rugged enough that it's going to survive traveling like that. And so forth. So there's that. All right, let's start getting on with the sound there, because as is typical, that's where the action is, right? Test gear that I used for this, I tried a couple of different ranges of signal chain price here. I did travel with this. I took a weekend trip here recently, and this went with me along with my Cord Hugo 2. And then that would have been fed by my iPad 10th generation. And then I have a little, actually it's right here. I have, and I can link to this, a DD Hi-Fi USB-C to coaxial cable here, and then to go into the Cord Hugo 2, just a little adapter here to use the coax input of the Hugo 2. Why not the USB? Because one, I don't really like the USB on that in most of the cases, and then my 2Go streamer is already plugged into that anyway. So I used the coax there from my 10th gen iPad using Rune Arc, which would have been streamed from my house there, all that. So that was one signal chain that I used. Okay, others that I tried, or I have in for review, the entry level, I think it's the FX Audio DR07. Apologies if that's the wrong number. I will correct that in the comments or in the description if I got that wrong. Little DAC amp, plugged this into that for a little bit, and then also got some time with my what recently came in for review was a HiFiMan EF 499 DAC amp and EF 500 DAC amp. This one went into the 499 for a little bit for some testing there. And then some time with the combination of the SMSL DO, is it the 100 or the 200? Well, anyway, one of the SMSL DO 100 or 200 Pro DACs, and then from the Lake People G111 Mark II amplifier there on that. Okay, so all of the files that I would have listened to would have been either lossless or high-res FLAC files, either through Rune, either played locally or streamed via Qobuz. There were some DSD files streamed locally, again through Rune, all right, in there as well. Okay, what did I learn through all of that? The sound signature of the MM-100 here is it's a little bit mid-forward in its overall presentation. The frequency response seems like it's almost dead flat from about 1 kilohertz all the way down into the bass, all the way down to like 20 hertz. It's like it just seems like it's almost ruler flat. The bass extension here is very good, but it's just very linear. There's really no elevation or anything like that in the sub bass that comes from a lot of the we would want to see, at least based on like the diffuse field and Harman targets that are out there these days. There's no shelf like that in the sub bass. It's just linear all the way down. Now, above 1 kilohertz is where things get a little bit more ragged. Now, it's not terrible, but there is a little bit of tonal unevenness through both the mids and the treble. And it's done in a way where the mid-range does sound a little bit shouty and honky to me. Now, that's very common for my ears with Audeze headphones. That's just a thing that the Audeze house sound brings that my ears pick up. This one is kind of middle of the pack. There are Audeze headphones that are more shouty to me than this one, including its big brother unit, the MM-100. And then there are also Audeze units that to me, like in their stock tuning, are less shouty than this one. The LCDX 2021 and the old LCD2 pre-phaser being two examples that come in mind of being less shouty than this one. The treble, however, is a little bit better. I didn't notice a ton of sibilance or sharpness and all of that in there. Cymbal crashes sound fairly tonally even and that sort of thing too, although there is just a little bit of shimmer to it. It's not too bad there. I think some will want a little bit more presence in the lower treble range because some cymbal crashes, particularly like big crash cymbals that have a little bit lower pitch to them than some other cymbals and all of that, might sound just a little bit too high pitched and tizzy, a little bit thin at times to some listeners. That didn't bother me a whole lot, but I think there will be some for whom that is a problem. For me, the mid-range tonality here was the bigger issue. So let's unpack this a little bit more then. So again, the overall kind of perceived frequency response tonality thing is slightly mid-forward. Pretty good bass extension, linear bass extension all the way down to 20 hertz though, even though there is no bass shelf to go with it down there. All right, digging deeper then into these individual aspects here. A strength of Audeze's house sound has always been the physicality of particularly the bass and the sub bass. And there's a fair amount of slam and impact here in the low end on this headphone. So the bass is not elevated or anything like that, but it does have some decent physicality to it, although not as much as some other Audeze headphones. And I think in some sense that is reflective of the fact that this is only a $400 unit, and a lot of Audeze's line is like $800, $1,000, and well up higher than that, right? So decent dynamic impact down low, not outstanding, okay, but it is there. Let's unpack the shoutiness, honkiness, and all of that in the mid-range timbre a little bit too, because again, like, it's kind of middle of the road in terms of offensiveness to my ears with that trait. And again, I've heard headphones both from Audeze and other companies that are worse, and then I've heard some that are far better. For the most part, like, the shoutiness, the amount of shoutiness and honkiness in the mids here was within the range that I could still mostly listen to music and not be bothered by it. But there were some tracks, and particularly some vocalists, where it would come across even more so. Like Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree, and then his own solo work and all of that. For whatever reason, his voice has always been an acid test for shoutiness for me, and like, this did not pass the test. And as much as I love his music, because I mean, Porcupine Tree and then most of his solo stuff is just all excellent, like, it gets a little grating and hard to listen to and fatiguing through the mids after a while. And that's not unique to Steven Wilson. There are other artists, vocalists and all of that can be a little bit too much on here. Some brass instruments can be a little bit too aggressive and all of that too with that as well. And so what happens for me with this headphone, again, particularly through the mid-range, is just it does not sound very natural. The balance between the bass and the mid-range, and then again, that little bit of a dip there in like the lower treble that I mentioned earlier and all of that, it just kind of gives the overall timbre of this thing a little bit of a thin quality to it. It's just, it needs a little bit more heft and tonal weight to it to sound real or natural or that sort of thing to my ears. And again, it's not horrendous. There were some times in some tracks that I was genuinely able to enjoy listening to with this one, but then something would come on in my shuffle, or I'd switch to a new album or something like that, and it just wouldn't be quite right. So it just wasn't consistent enough for me to like give a strong recommendation for this one in terms of just at-home music listening, music enjoyment across a wide variety of music and all of that. Okay. But it's not really designed to be an at-home use kind of headphone. It is really marketed as a pro-use unit, and of course the collaboration with an actual audio pro and Manny Marroquin just doubles down on that, right? And so what we get here, and then also in the MM-100, is like what a particular audio professional thinks is useful and helpful for them to do their professional audio work. So what do I think Marroquin is chasing here? What I noticed, like, one of the positive trade-offs of the mid-range presentation here is that things like room reverbs, and if your drummer does a lot of ghost notes, and like that sort of thing, like room sounds and like the finger action on a lot of instruments and all of that, like those kinds of things come through very clearly on this headphone. I wouldn't call it outstandingly resolving, right? It's not going to blow you away with detail retrieval or anything like that. At least it didn't for me. Okay, but the way the mid-range is tuned, the tonal balance through it does make a couple of things stand out, or a few types of things, and I just mentioned a few of them. Echoes, room reverbs, room sounds. If your drummer does a lot of ghost notes on their hits and all of that, you know, those kinds of things come through really well on this. And I suspect that what Marroquin is doing is he's pumping up that mid-range in a certain way, or he's asking for those mids to be tuned a certain way so that he can catch that kind of stuff. Because sometimes those things can enhance the listening experience, sometimes they can get in the way. That's just me making a hypothesis here. I could be completely off on that in terms of his mix, like, and why he asked it to be tuned that way. So If the tuning of this works for you, then I think it could be a pretty effective professional audio tool as well. But to me, the interesting part about that is like, I have reviewed well over 100 headphones now, either on this YouTube channel or like when I was doing written reviews before. And a number of them, I don't know the exact number, but a good chunk of them have come through claiming to be effective for professional audio use. And I gotta tell you that the headphones that come through here that claim to be good for professional use are as diverse and as varied in their sound, in their frequency response, in their presentation, in their technical prowess, as all of the headphones on the other side that are just meant for more home use kind of thing, end user listening kind of use case. So to call it pro, I'm a little bit confused and puzzled as to what that means anymore, but at least having Mariquin's name on this makes it clear that this is like what one particular pro thinks is helpful. Okay, so that's something there, and you may agree with that or you may not. It's worth finding out. But last thing I want to talk about then before we go here, and then we'll kind of wrap some comparisons into this here a bit, is it worth 400 bucks? Because I don't know that I'm quite convinced on that. I think $400 MSRP might be just a little bit of a reach, not an egregious reach, but just a little bit of a reach for the MM-100. This is the Master plus Sennheiser HD6XX, which is very similar to the HD650, the Sennheiser HD650, and is a sibling model to the Sennheiser HD600. Now, the 600 in particular also has a reputation as being an excellent professional use headphone, and it is much more neutrally tuned and natural sounding to my ear than the MM-100 is. Okay? So, I mean, that option is out there. That's just going to be, does the tuning of the 600 work for you? And I think, like, for home use, the 600, I think, is going to please more people than the MM-100 is going to. All right. I don't have it in front of me right now, but at $280 right now is the Hi-Fiman Sundara, which is a more like-for-like thing, and of course it being like a lesser expensive planar magnetic headphone from one of the heavyweight brands in our hobby. I would call Audeze a heavyweight brand in our hobby as well. The Sundara is it is a warmer, fuller tuning than this, but I would say it at least equals the MM-100 in terms of resolution, spatial holography, and that sort of thing. So I think the Sundara will please more people for like end user kind of at home music listening enjoyment kind of things. The MM-100 might be a little bit more effective for a small number of audio professionals out there, because the Sundara is not marketed as a pro audio use headphone at all. But I think, and the Sundara in particular is why I think the MM-100 might be just a little bit overpriced, is that's because I can't really find a technical advantage that this one has over the Sundara. Like all of those things that I mentioned about like the room reverbs and the ghost notes and all of that come out because of the mid-range tuning on the MM-100, they are all also present and presented well on the Sundara. They're just not as forward. They're not as pushed forward in the mix. They're not as noticeable as they are on the MM-100. So I would probably wait for a sale on this, even if you are a pro audio person who might be interested in this headphone. $400 might be a bit cheap. Last thing I will, or might be a bit much, I should say. Last thing I will mention is equalization. Because Audeze as a headphone company leans into equalization more than any other headphone company that I'm aware of right now. And in fact, they put out their own equalization software and presets and all of that kind of thing. Can you EQ up the bass on the MM-100 and get a fuller and more fleshed out presentation across the board? To some extent, yes. It does take to a bass boost quite well. I did that through the Black Ice Audio Aries, which I did a review of recently, that has a very effective sub-bass equalization dial on it. Bumped that up a couple of notches and thought that this handled that quite well. What I did not do was do a deep dive on like some of the really fine-tuned equalization kind of stuff that you will get from, the guys over at the Headphone Show, or something like that, like, or oratory. Like, I did not get into it that level to tweak the mid-range. Namely, I don't want to, because a lot of that is software-based EQ, and I just find software-based EQ to be very limiting and very much a pain, and it just gets in the way a lot. So I didn't do that here. Okay, but Audeze's generally do take to EQ fairly well. So if you are an EQ fan, that might be a way to improve the experience with the MM-100 to your liking as well. But for my ears and for my use, this would not be a headphone that I would listen to very much, so I'm not going to recommend it for at-home use. I think it will find a niche audience among pro audio users, though, just because the tuning is such that it presents some things in just the right way that some pros may find clearly helpful, and like clearly Manny Marroquin does. And I mean, and his mixes sound great. I'm not always into the top 40 music kind of stuff that he often mixes, but some of the stuff that he has done that I've listened to, I'm like, wow, this is really well done. So clearly he knows what he's doing. I assume that his Audezes have helped him on some of the more recent ones. They sound great. All right. So I'm going to leave it there. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Audeze MM-100 planar magnetic headphone. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon. Generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.